Yo, this is your boy Miguel. Welcome to Common Conversations. This is a blog, podcast, radio show, television, now commercial broadcast, TV, stream, and I just keep making it up. But
are we?
It's a thing.
Okay. Yes.
All right. Cool. So this is our podcast. I'm your host. My name is Miguel Hampton, and this is a thing that we do where we have conversations about everything. I tend to try not to make it up, but Brittany said I can't lie today, so we're gonna get down with the get down. And this is my co-host.
Hi, friends. I'm Missy Smith.
And that just warms me up when she says hi, friends, because I do not do that. Today we have a great show because this is part of our, this is part of our series.
Yes.
And all about what? What are we?
We're talking about all things related to equity in Southern Indiana and really pinpointing and focusing in on our community and how the systems either are or are not equitable and what we need to do to bring more equity and access to Southern Indiana.
Yes. And so today is Let's Talk Mental Health. Let's talk mental wellness. Depending on what post or feed you got, it probably said something different because we do that. We've got a great group of experts that are going to come up and talk about who they are as practitioners, as well as what they see or don't see in the community at large, where there may be some opportunity for us to do better, grow, and expand.
We are Harper Slade LLC, a racial equity advisory firm. We help companies cultivate an environment where Black and brown talent can thrive and transform workplace cultures. With over 20 years' experience in human resources, employment law, and macroeconomics, our goal is to help advance a true commitment to racial equity. Through education programs, racial equity assessments, and advisory services, we're a global leader and are here to help you make a difference. Visit harperslade.com to learn more.
Where you get your drip.
And friends, again, we want to welcome you. We are so excited that you're here. We do want to acknowledge that this entire year's worth of projects, so our podcast, our panel discussions, our eventual documentary that we've not talked a lot about, is all funded by a grant from the Indiana Department of Health, Office of Minority Health. They believe in the need to name these challenges that we are facing in Southern Indiana so much that they were willing to fund it and want us to even take it further in the future. So we are very excited about their support. We definitely want to name that moving forward. So let's talk about who we have today, and then we will get into what we're here to do. So Russ Irvin Funk, MSW, from Howard University, is a consultant who works with agencies and organizations to make their services and resources meaningfully accessible to male-identified clients. Russ has more than 20 years' experience in working with men, boys, and male-identified people. He's internationally recognized for these efforts. Russ lives in Louisville with his partner, their child, and a cat who belongs to himself, which I really enjoyed. He does photography, he gardens, he takes bike rides in the park, and enjoys camping and hiking. So thank you, Russ, for being here.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yay. Brittany Johnson is a licensed mental health counselor in private practice in Southern Indiana. Brittany is an approved consultant in EMDR and a trauma expert focusing on attachment and relational trauma, anxiety, and self-sabotage. Brittany is an author of Get Out of Your Own Way, 21 Days to Stop Self-Sabotage. Thank you for being here, Brittany.
Thank you for having me.
And Teah Williams-Hampton, LCSW, provides services with the focus of creating safe spaces for people to heal and live authentically. Teah works with Avenues Unlimited and in private practice. Teah most enjoys working with adults who are seeking to understand and break the patterns that keep them from living their best lives. Thank you for being here, Teah. In full disclosure, she is married to Miguel.
That's how I got here, really. I mean, obviously.
No, she got here because I love her so deeply. Okay, friends. So I want to just jump into what we're talking about. So we're talking about mental health services as they exist in Southern Indiana and their accessibility and equitability. So would you say, from your vantage point, that it's easy for all members of our community to access mental health services?
There's several stories, but I will stick to kind of summarizing them all. Prior to me going into private practice, I worked for an agency that did in-home therapy with children and families. And so when we would be looking for aftercare It was almost impossible to find aftercare for people who couldn't afford private pay or didn't have private insurance. And then if you wanted to look for someone who had the same cultural background or was at least culturally diverse, it was almost impossible to find for many reasons. Number one, that there wasn't a lot of practitioners that marketed themselves that way. Number two, you can't necessarily call an agency and say, hey, I want to put my client with your therapist that, has this background. Like, that wasn't something that you could do back then. And then also, again, that socioeconomic barrier is huge in Southern Indiana. Like, there's almost a complete divide of the have and the have-not. And if you're in the have-not, you are not going to get quality care, unfortunately, easily. Let me say that, easily.
Right, I totally agree with that. So I'll just give you a little bit more of my background. So I am a licensed clinical social worker, but a lot of my work also has been in racial equity, social justice, and so there's always an awareness here. And I'm going to encourage you all, as we're kind of processing and having these conversations, to also check in with yourself about what you are aware of in your own spaces, in your own agencies, and just within yourself in terms of how people of color and other marginalized organizations are able or not able to access care. So part of that is probably going to be a whole lot of piggybacking, because she just kind of wrapped up a whole lot of what we were gonna. No, because it's fine. It is fine. So my background comes from 12 years in community mental health. I had worked with the largest community mental health agency here in Southern Indiana. So as a case manager, and then also as a therapist. So as a community mental health practitioner, you really get to see who gets to get here and who doesn't, and for what reasons that those are happening. So whether it is stigma within the community, whether it's not being able to request the type of therapist that you want to have, which by the time I left, that began to change and shift, and I'm probably going to be all over the place here, but I think a lot of that had to do with me having a supervisor that was a woman of color. So that became a possibility, that if someone called asking for an Hispanic or a biracial or a black therapist, that it wasn't seen as this person is trying to control and circumvent the system that we have. Nobody else can do that. But to be able to say this person has particular and specific needs that are going to be critical to how they engage and the quality of their engagement with them. So I'm not going to go all over the place with it, because I know we've got some more to do. But the quick answer is no. People can come, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to get through the process of the system. What if I know that when I was working in community mental health, you had to come with there were two different appointments. You had to do a paperwork appointment first. That might be at like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. If you got kids, 3 kids, how are you going to be able to do that? And then you get your actual clinician appointment, which you probably may not have been able to choose that clinician. So you're hoping you're able to connect with that clinician. On top of that, what if you need medication? So you got to definitely see your therapist at least 3 times or 6 times, I forget, before you can do that. And so when you are dealing with folks who already are there because there is life happening, when the systems begin to kind of impact you in a stressful way as well, it's like, why would I be doing this? And there are a whole lot of other things that go along with it, but I can ramble on and on with it.
When you just said that, life is happening, we also need to keep in mind that for everybody, no one seeks services until the house is on fire. It's very rare that you get people who really are trying to be preventative. And in a lot of ways, it's a privilege to be preventative. And when I say privilege, I'm not directly talking about race. It's just a privilege in terms of your socioeconomic status, your availability, your, what you know from childhood, what the beliefs have been instilled in your family in terms of we take care of things before they're on fire. So if you have somebody waiting till they're on fire, they might be psychotic, they might be severely depressed, and then they're trying to navigate these systems that are put in place. It's almost impossible, and it's easy to give up. Yep. And so a lot of it is also that too, right? If I've got to go through, you just said 2 appointments before I can even see a therapist, 3 more before I can see a doctor when I'm really here because I know I need the medicine. Like, that's just a lot of middle that most people can't handle. I know that I can handle it, and I'm pretty intelligent and savvy. But I don't know if I could navigate that system, if I'm being completely honest. Like, that's overwhelming.
As a social worker in the area, it was part of our job to help people through that process. And we are degreed social workers, and we are having hard times understanding the systems, what's required, that, okay, so they're going to come to do this paperwork appointment, but when they come to the next one, it's possible you've double booked that person. So it's kind of like, who gets there first? And that will count against you for the times. So for you, those of you who don't know, if you need a psychiatrist and to get meds prescribed, you have to see your therapist, I think it's 6 times in a row, it was at least last time I checked, in order to get to your psychiatrist to be eligible to do that. If they've double booked you, that counts against you. So you have to restart that 6 all over again. And if you are in the middle of an episode, like a manic episode, I'm lucky I got you there the first time. Lord help us. Like, how am I going to get you there again when and pray they didn't double book you? And how demoralizing that would be to have that experience. So Russ, what about you? What do you think?
What do you think, Russ?
I think I really appreciate one of you two use the word marginalized, and I think that's really an important kind of piece. I want to kind of bounce off that for a minute because we talk a lot about marginalized people, but don't talk about somebody has to be doing the marginalizing.
Come on.
It is not our human nature to live on the margins. We have to be forced there.
Yeah.
Our human nature is to be center of our own lives. And so I think, I don't know the details about how unavailable and inaccessible the resources are. I know in the region that if you look at where mental health services are located, it's not similar to where physical health services are located. They are located in privileged communities. There are mental health deserts all over southern Indiana and Kentucky. And that is not accidental, right? And I think part of the question that we have to ask, we as white people, we as privileged practitioners, is how does my system, how does my organization, how does my profession participate in the marginalizing that, in terms of mental health, that magnifies and impacts the experience of being marginalized in other ways, right? So what you all were talking about was people who are already marginalized then come to the door and they're being marginalized again. And that is not the way I was raised up to be a social worker. I was raised up to be a social worker to open doors to how people get access, which meant, in my experience, we talked about a little bit about this earlier, in my experience, it meant going to people's homes. You can't come to us, I'll come to you. And in parts of Washington, D.C. and parts of Baltimore where I got my ground in this work, a white professional social worker walking up into somebody's home, sometimes that was a little bit threatening. I don't want to talk about being threatened, because I think the issue, they were threatened by this white dude walking up, because what did that mean, right? In those neighborhoods, a white dude walking up with a suit and a briefcase meant you're a narc or you're coming to arrest somebody, not you're coming to help. And so just think about what that means in terms of the defenses that they have in place to stay alive with the person that's supposed to be there to provide services and resources. And what's the work that I had to do to demarginalize them in our relationship? Demarginalization is an active process that I find very few of our organizations and networks and professionals in this community are practicing.
Thank you so much for naming that.
Okay, so just real quick. So just a little sidebar. If you've not read the book, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, I think that's how you say his name, please read his book. And I'm saying that because as we begin to speak about these experiences, as we begin to talk about what is kind of happening here, you may notice your own body reaction
I was about to say
it.
that. Yeah.
And I think it's important to be aware of that and take note of that and be curious about that, because often you will have the same physical response when you are in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, threatened, and scared. So my feelings also have a story, right? I always say, trust your feeling because those are real. Your feelings, that's why they call them feelings, not seeings, right? Because we can feel that. But question your thought. Question the story. Be curious about the story instead of just falling into it and believing it. And oftentimes when we are working with folk, you know, we go to school, we get trained, we even are talking about cultural competency. What you talked about, and including with demarginalization, is cultural humility, to decenter yourself out of that. And that's not something that we talk a lot about. So I'm just saying, just notice what comes up for you and notice when it came up. And maybe take a note about that, because that is something to explore for later, because we take us with ourselves everywhere we go.
And
So-
please don't run from it.
And please don't run from it. That's why I said, don't run. Here we are, right here, don't run.
Natural. It is
Yes,
natural
it's
and
natural.
normal.
Yes.
And I don't know we have other questions and things, but this is bringing up, you talked about how do we demarginalize, how do we do this? The thing that I've noticed the most with working with different organizations is the way that people view people who don't look like them for whatever reason, right? So if somebody's tall, somebody's short, you know, wide, skinny, like whatever, the way we view people and the way we have been taught by our systems to view people also impacts how people get access. I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen people see somebody and they label them angry when really the person is anxious.
Yes.
Right? Like they label them as defiant because they're shut down. They label them as, you know, not doing what they're supposed to do because they're disassociating. And it does look different based on the population, based on the culture. All those things look different. So as you're writing down what you notice with your body, I also want to challenge you to think about how do you view people who are seeking services? How do you view the people that are your ideal people to seek services? How do you view the people who are not ideal that seek services? How do you view the people who do not seek services? Right? I really want you to think about that too, because that also plays into how we create systems of how people get access, right? So if I have this belief that all black teenagers are angry, defiant, want to vandalize, want to tear things up, I'm probably not going to offer them any anxiety help. I'm probably not going to offer them anything on disassociation, right? I'm probably not going to ask anything about their body. I'm going to go straight behavioral and straight talking about how you need to change these behaviors and why this is why your people do and get these type of services. And so we also have to change that if we really want to start making change in our communities. We have to change the way we view everybody that we see. That lens has to change.
I really appreciate your commentary about labeling. And one of the things that I learned early on was rather than make assumptions about what that means, your behavior, your look, your gestures, rather than me making assumptions, let me ask. Rather than me
curious.
labeling you, let me open the door for you to label yourself.
Yeah.
Because that's a part of understanding that I don't get. You know, I'm white, I'm Irish. What I feel, y'all are gonna see. I do not have a poker face. And so that's part of it for me too. I know this is going on my face. I've got a client working in front of me or a group that I'm working with. They seen this and they're interpreting it the way they need to interpret it unless I explain. Okay? You need to know that when I'm listening hard to what you gotta say, I am not gonna be looking you at the eye right now. That does not mean I'm dissociating. That does not mean I'm distancing you. It means I am really taking in what you've got to say. If I don't explain that to you, you're going to see me look across the eye and make up your own story about what that means. And if you're my client, I've probably just lost you. Unless you're native, and then that's part of the cultural reality that I ain't supposed to look you in the eye. So, you know, there's that,
But you
there's
gotta
that
know
piece
those
too. But I
things.
got to know those things.
Yeah.
So I think it's important not only for us to allow people to label themselves, but also be aware of what's going on in our bodies and label that for the people we're working with,
Definitely.
so that they don't mislabel it because of whatever. Or maybe their label is legit, and mine the one, you know, my own mislabeling is what's going on. I mean, I don't know.
So when you're mentioning all of this, another type of labeling is coming to mind for me, and it ties into us saying, if you were to call a local community mental health provider and say, I need a black provider, for 1,000 reasons that you should have the right to say that. And in Southern Indiana, they're going to tell you we don't have any. And I made that call this week just to be sure that that was still the case. So the largest community mental health provider, which is, if you have state insurance, that really is your option. When I called both local offices, they do not have a Black provider. Can we, number one, mention why it is essential to have Black providers? And what lies behind possibly the fact that we don't have more Black mental health providers?
Okay, just real quick.
Well, the question.
I'll be dramatic. So, all right. Here's what I've also noticed about my role. So I used to work for the largest community mental health organization here, and at the time that I worked with dual diagnosis, clients. So they had, substance abuse problems and mental health issues. My team at the time was, it was pretty diverse. My team was. But we also worked with clients that nobody really wanted to work with. We were known as the stepchild of the community mental health organization. I left and I came back. The team that I worked with for the second time, there was one Black therapist and one Black case manager, but then we ended up with a Black supervisor. And it was the first time that I had worked with a seriously diverse group, and it was a racially diverse group. And I'm gonna say this, sometimes in our language, diversity will mean very different things. And I have walked into rooms where there is diversity, but it is white people exploring the diversity of white people. So we have white people from the LGBTQ community. We've got older white people. We've got younger white people. We have white people who are disabled. We have white folks that may not have a lot of money. We got white folks with a lot of money. We got white business owners. We got white folks who are unemployed. So I think it's important that as we play with words, that we be very clear about what we're looking for here. But that was the first time that I had worked with a group where not only I worked with somebody whose family was from South Africa, but her family was from Southeast Asia. I worked with an African immigrant. I worked with a woman who was Hispanic and biracial. I had 2 white therapists that worked there. I mean, it was an incredibly diverse and rich group. And because of that, even in our treatment teams, the things we had to explore in our treatment teams were absolutely critical and phenomenal to the care that our clients were looking for. And when issues would come up, there were people in the room who could actually address it from a real world, real experience, and educated perspective. And so part of the role that I've had in the community, because for whatever reason, I'm gonna let her talk about this, but I'm one of the only Black clinicians that people know here. So I see adults primarily. I do not see children. I've just started seeing adolescent girls if they're parentified and adultified. Let me be specific about that. Right? But what I have become is the person that people call when they're looking for clinicians, specifically Black clinicians. I've got white moms who have biracial children looking for biracial and Black clinicians. And I know how hard it is. I don't take insurance. So it's very, very difficult for folks to afford me. I have 2 practices. My main practice that I work with over in Louisville, it's $130 per session. But the one here, Attuned Counseling and Consulting, got a woman who has 3 kids, all special needs. She has Medicaid. I don't do that. She was also unemployed, but she had to stay home to take care of her kids. I see her for $20 a session. You're not gonna get clinicians to do that. I'd be on food stamps too. I would be on food stamps too. So I have this practice here just to create access, but I can't live off of it. But it was important enough for her to find somebody. She's in Terre Haute. She could not find a Black clinician. I do telehealth. So she sees me. So she had to look for me. I don't know how far Terre Haute is, but that's a long way. But it was important enough. Yeah, it was important enough because I'm not going to judge her about having 3 kids and being at home. I don't know that any of you would too, but you know what? She knew I wouldn't. She didn't even want to have to explain all that. She didn't want to do that. So it's very, very important to be able to do that. I've called to largest mental health organization looking for a Black or biracial clinician. I think this is something to really, really hone in on, is that community mental health organizations are there because they are supposed to be the most accessible. But if you're looking at your staff, and your staff does not represent or is not representative of its surrounding community, there's a problem. And so if you're wondering why you don't see these people, or why they might just be remanded through CPS, or the judicial system and not coming in voluntarily, don't get me wrong, because there are other things that are behind that too. But when you don't see anybody that looks like you, it's real important. You're probably not gonna show up to even engage a process that is absolutely difficult and stressful. So I know that was a lot, but
no, one of the things you said was when your team was diverse racially, you had a Black female supervisor. Mm-hmm. And those of us who have been responsible for hiring and making hiring decisions, we know we are the gatekeepers to bring people in. Mm-hmm. And if someone presents in a way, and you haven't checked your biases at the door, and someone presents in a way that you don't find professional enough, or they, and we talked about this, about how it even changes the way that you do your hair when you're working in a private sector and working for yourself as a Black woman. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Can we?
go ahead.
Yes, and Russ.
Before you answer that, we go to that question. One of the things that struck me about the question is we don't have, as white people, we don't face that same issue. Nope. And what would it be like? I got my roots in this work in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. So I know a little bit about the experience of white people walking into an all-Black therapeutic center, and you got to choose. And how, for different reasons, white people turned around. No, I don't need that bad. I'm okay. So I think it's important that we continue to interrogate why we put Black and brown people in these positions that white people don't have to be in. I would also add to the question, not just Black or brown, but Black or brown male. Mm-hmm. Where are the Black and brown male therapists?
Mm-hmm. They're unicorns
in our communities, right?
They're unicorns,
right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean about making meaningfully accessible services to male-type human beings who deserve care? Now, I don't want to. I do think there are systemic issues in play in terms of why male-type people don't access the services that they deserve. I think it's also important to lay out the broader context that the way we raise human beings to be men teaches them to not ask for help.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What you do, you're out on the football field, you break your arm, what you do is you could take 3 minutes, toughen up and get back in the field, because that's what a man does. And you say ouch later, if ever. And so if you can't say ouch about breaking your arm, how do you say ouch about your broken heart? Mm-hmm. Or how do you say ouch about what happened 20 years ago when you were 14?
Come on.
Yeah.
And if we don't have Black male therapists who are available for other men to say, hey, ouch. Mm-hmm. I need a brother right now to hold me. Not to discount the value and role of women in providing care for men. I'm not discounting that at all. And alongside that is, how do we build up male-type human beings to be the caregivers of other men and take all of that obligation off of women?
I do want to say, though, in terms of hiring and things like that, we have to look at it from multiple lenses. Number one, if we're talking about just our area, we do have to keep into consideration that we do have a larger city right across 5 minutes away, right? Mm-hmm. There's a larger city that has more job opportunities. We also have to take into account that there might not be diverse people applying to the jobs, because there's various reasons to that, right? They may have went on some of those websites to see what are people saying about what it's like to work there. They might have talked to other people. It could be, like we talked once before, they don't see anybody that looks like them in the magazines or the advertisements, so why would I apply? Mm-hmm. But the other issue that I don't think we even give enough attention to is the fact that historically, social workers were white women who felt sorry for people, right? So if you still have those type of people going to school and those type of people doing these things, that's also what you're going to get in your offices, and that's also why people might be turning away. Because if I have somebody that feels sorry for me as a black woman, oh, we're done. Because I don't need you to feel sorry for me.
Right.
I need you to either show me where the resources are so I can do it myself, or just get out of the way completely. Like, we've
Right.
had that conversation a few times. Like, I know how to do some things, but if I've got people in the way that's blocking it and
That's
putting up
it.
these extra roadblocks, just get out of the way,
Right.
And so that's the other thing. Culturally, most black women, and we're getting away from that superwoman complex,
Yeah.
and we're marching away from it. But historically, we were social workers without a degree in our
Right.
families, right? We knew all those things without even having to go to school. Why am I going to go to school for something I've already been doing? In
Right.
fact, I'm tired of doing it, and I want to just get away, right? Like, I can remember listening to my aunts make comments like that. My grandmother be tired of taking care of the entire community. The women of the church doing everything. They were social workers.
Yes, they were.
They were therapists. They were caretakers, right? So we also have to keep that in mind. People aren't going to apply if it doesn't feel welcoming,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I really want to name, before we jump to some questions, I really want to name that one of the reasons that we wanted this project to come off the ground at all was the fact that we live in the shadow of Louisville, but we are not Louisville. And our families, especially those with state insurance, cannot access any services across the river. So if you live in a privileged space, in a space of privilege, you don't know that. You don't know that, yeah, there are a lot of services in Louisville, and I'll go get those. But the clients I serve, that transportation is an issue, number one, but the insurance isn't going to cover it to get across. So it is important that we name, if we want our communities to be better, we have to stop seeing ourselves as part of Louisville, because for the communities that have been marginalized, they are not. They are very deeply Jeffersonville and New Albany. They cannot leave those spaces, so we have to make those spaces serve them.
And I think there are times when I have been in the space of serving black and brown clients. Sorry, black and brown human beings. And I think one of the things that is really critical for us to do is make whiteness an issue. Because it is one. Y'all know I'm white. They knew I was white. I know I'm white. There's an issue that might, of that distance, that might interfere with our being able to have the relationship that we need in order for you to get better. So let me give you permission to say, there's some things I have that I'm going on that I can't talk with you about because you're white. I was working here in Jeffersonville, this is a few years ago, with a group of, with the YMCA, it was a partnership with the YMCA, and they had a group of kids, young men, who were supported to be in the program because they had gotten in trouble in the school. So these were legally involved, mostly black and brown, all black and brown adolescent youth. The idea was that they would come up with an idea that they took it was a leadership development program. And the idea that they came up with on their own was that they wanted to get donations from other teenagers that they would deliver to the Center for Women and Family Shelter on Mother's Day. Understanding that when people think about donating to the Center for Women and Families, they think about moms or they think about babies. They don't think about the fact that some of these moms have teenage kids who need some resources too. So these black and brown youth went to their schools, went to the principals, and said, we want to set up bins along the school and ask youth to bring items, not money, we're not going to deal with cash, bring items that are supportive of kids. To a principal, all of whom were white, every one of them said no. Now, we can point fingers at those principals. I need to point a finger at myself, because I know how white supremacy works. I should have known better. I should have had the conversation ahead of time with those principals and said, this is what's coming, what do you need from us to say yes? Yeah. I and the Y should have had those conversations ahead of time. So I brought that to those male youth and said, that must have broke y'all heart. I let y'all down. In a youth leadership program, it is not my job to set you up to fail, but guess what I did? And so before we can go any further, y'all need to talk with me about how pissed off you are at me for setting you up to fail. And it took weeks Because how often do black and brown youth who have been marginalized in other ways get the opportunity to tell an old white man, I'm mad at you? And trust that I'm going to be there and not defend myself and not excuse myself and just take your punches.
Or trust that you're not going to shut them out.
Either one.
You know, I mean, you know,
Yes.
so I just kind of want to jump in here, and I like that you're bringing this up. So part of my work really started when I was in high school. I've always been a part of the NAACP, but it really started when I was in high school, and we did this whole after-school forum about race, and it was called School Colors. And we had all these candid discussions about race and this and that. And we had a principal, Ward Weber, and we had a theater teacher, a white theater teacher, Miss Jenny Herfel. And that was the first time that we were actually given a platform or an opportunity to speak about our experiences without the fear that something bad was going to happen, or that we were going to lose opportunities, or that we were going to be shut out. And as of late, because I've been talking about these things for a long time, I really made the decision that when we get into spaces where, if we're just talking about race, so systemic barriers don't just include race, right? We got lots of marginalized opportunities, right?
Yeah.
But this just seems to be the hot button one, you know, that I really don't want to talk about race and only talk about people of color. I really just would rather talk about whiteness at this point, because I think that's the elephant in the room that doesn't get discussed a lot. You can't have this whole spectrum of people of different colors without starting with whiteness.
And then how we get those diversity programs that aren't really diverse?
Yes, yeah, all of those. And I would encourage you to kind of lean into that and explore what that actually means. Explore what that actually means. And one of the things that I loved about being in community mental health, because I got to work with a lot of poor white people, and I would hear, you know, their frustration with often being forgotten, or even with words like racism. I didn't realize for years, I'm talking about racism, I'm thinking everybody thinks it's the same thing. And one of my clients, she said, I'm so sick of Jesse Jackson talking about race and racism and whatever. She said, I know real racists. And she said, I'm scared of them. And I said, so when we're talking about whiteness, we talking about race, we're not even talking about the same thing. We're not talking about the same thing. So I'm gonna encourage you, just like with what Russ said, you know, to really consider what whiteness means, because I think about it every day. I think about my blackness every day. And one of those things that I learned when I was young and talking about that, I mean, Ms. Herfel said, well, I just don't even think about being white. I said, how do you not think about being a white person? She said, it just doesn't come up.
Yeah.
Now, this was 30 years ago. It's different now after 2020. So I think we have to acknowledge that hopefully some things have really, that awareness has changed somewhat. Oh, okay. I didn't have too much hope. Some awareness has come after that, but I know I just kind of went on a tangent there, but I kind of wanted to pick up what you put down on that.
And to bounce off that, a reminder as you're thinking about whiteness and what it means to you to be white, noticing where that rests in your body. Because we all have feelings about being white. We don't talk about it. We have thoughts about it, but we also have feelings about it, and our feelings are locked in our bodies.
And this is not about guilt.
No.
Let me say this loudly. This is not about guilt. Recently, I've been doing more presentations with companies on how microaggressions impact productivity. And one of the things that I make sure to say loud and clear is this is not about you needing to feel any guilt for being white. This is not about you needing to fall on a sword for being white. This is, please don't do that.
Right.
Please don't feel like you need to do that, right? This is just about looking at, as an individual, what can I do to make advancements in this space to make this better? Not let me say that I'm falling on a sword and I'm sorry for being white. Please don't do that. And please tell all of your family and friends to stop doing that as well, because it's not a good idea.
Well, and that's also
right?
just
Like,
centering themselves. Like, oh, I feel, and then my tears and white tears are a whole
well,
different
I
thing.
mean, it's that, but it's also like that's not what we need, or that's not what anybody needs, right? It's not helpful.
Right.
And so we're trying to help and move forward as a unit, right? So.
And kind of related to that, thank you, and related to that for me is the best way for me to figure out what my part of the solution is to interrogate the way I'm part of the problem. Because otherwise, it's all stays up, this conceptualized kind of, I get the, but if I really want to feel in my body what my part of the solution is, I got to feel, and then it gets really clear. Which there is not much question. If I can tell you how I have marginalized people this week, I know how to flip the switch. Flip the switch.
You got it.
Flip something.
Hello, my name is Nick Marshall. I have a list of questions, but I'm going to go with the first one I had. You spoke about barriers, and then also you just mentioned roadblocks as well. How can we break those barriers and have these conversations that we were having here to systematically break down what is happening? And also, you speak of roadblocks. How do we politely talk to people to get out of the way?
I think we have to get past polite,
I was gonna-
unfortunately.
what if
We don't need to be disrespectful, but I think we have to get past pleasantries, because pleasantries, unfortunately, leave a lot of room for things to stay the same and for us to just talk. So, again, I'm not an advocate of you need to be, loud and rude, but you do need to stand firm and say what you need to say without the fear of retaliation or whatnot. So that's what I'm going to say, that we got to get past pleasantries. I think in terms of making movement, we are going to have to get the decision makers in this community in a room together to actually come up with solutions. Because the other thing that happens, and it's not just this area, it's pretty much everywhere. The other thing that happens is we'd like to do a lot of lip service. We like to talk about the problem, we talk around the problem, we talk through the problem, but we never actually move to solving the problem, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And some of it, I'm just gonna be frank, some of it is because there are some companies that get paid to keep the problem the same, right? And then you have all these other companies that are trying to fight it, but there's several companies that their job is to keep it the same, or they make money off of the next step, right? So if you think about how much money a long-term detention center gets for one kid. When I did my internship in Kentucky years and years ago, it was $125 a day that they made off of any kid being in some type of placement, right? So then we've got the shoe companies that they get the shoes from, because everybody has to wear the same shoes. So that company needs to make money. We've got the uniform company making money. We've got the toothbrush distributor making money. We've got the soap person making money. So you also have to keep in mind that there are a lot of companies who benefit from the system staying the same. So we have to get the decision makers who can make change. We really, at this point, we have to be in a room and we have to take the gloves off, right? And it's time to actually see what we can do. Sometimes it is gonna be within the limit of knowing that these other companies need to make money, right? But we still need to do it in a different way. I remember when I did in-home therapy, I was on the JDAI committee when they first started bringing that to Clark County. And the pushback we received, because we wanted to come up with alternatives to detention for kids, was ridiculous. And in a lot of ways, what ended up being implemented, we knew was gonna fail, but it was on purpose, because they wanted to prove that the system didn't work here, even though it was very successful in West Lafayette. It was successful in Lafayette. It was successful in Terre Haute. It was successful in all these other places around Indiana that have more people. It wasn't gonna be successful here, right? And so we need, that's something that we have to think about. We've got to get people at the table that are ready to do this work for what we can do.
And I want to name very intentionally, so when this project was created, that was our intent, was that, and in my naivete, and Miguel let me go with it, because he was like, oh, baby. No. I felt like if we gave local leaders an opportunity to be in the room together, and if we invited people who could make changes, that's who was going to come. And we just didn't have a a place for them to brainstorm and make these changes, because obviously they want to make the community better. Lower, that is not what has happened. But if each of you invite the leaders that you know, you all have access to local leaders, but they need to be in these spaces and have these conversations and then be challenged to make the changes. That's what we need. We need those people in these spaces. And then if they're not here, we need to hold them accountable for their lack of ability to show up. We make it very clear when we're doing this, and they get free food. So really, like, what is their deal? But that is the question, is why aren't they in these spaces?
I want to
No, go
echo what you said about polite. The way I was raised up at Howard in Washington, D.C. with black and brown supervisors, they weren't trying to be polite to my white ass. There was a lot of grace on the backside. Of course you made that mistake. You're white. Of course you did. Do not make it again. You got another mistake you're going to make? We'll give you grace around that mistake, but learn your lesson. Don't do it again. Do something else, but right? The other solution that comes to my mind is we have spent so much time and energy and effort professionalizing what we do that doesn't need to be professionalized. We can democratize mental health care for each other. The racial uprising taught us this. You don't need to have a degree to listen well.
Come on.
You don't need to have a degree to practice EMDR, whatever. I know what it.
What is
Wait a minute now. Look.
You don't need. There are a lot of ways that we can teach people on the ground how to
Yes.
listen well,
Yes.
how to attend to each other.
Yeah.
They don't
How to
need to
build
spend
relationship.
$135 an hour to get cared for.
Right.
That, I believe, alongside, I absolutely agree, alongside pulling the leaders in, getting new damn leaders. If the leaders ain't going to lead, time for them to go.
Please.
And alongside that, how do we train people up so that when my neighbor is hurting, when people in my church are hurting or in my congregation are hurting, that they don't have to wait in line for some therapist somewhere to be available. They got people around them.
Speak about, you mentioned related issues. I think that it should go without saying, but we don't have panels on homelessness this year. We don't have panels on the criminal justice system, but this is it. Because we don't have homelessness without lack of mental health service and access. We don't have a overcrowded jail without access to good mental health services. And once you get in the jail, your mental health services or mental health issues are just exacerbated. The lack of mental health access in this community is costing this community untold lives and untold money. So the fact that leaders are invested in not making a change, we have to ask why those systems that they're willing to let those be as they are. Who is benefiting from the fact that we have untold number of unhoused people in downtown Jeffersonville? And who's benefiting from the jail being overcrowded? I mean, I have some thoughts on that, but are those the same people standing in the way to changing access? We have 5 minutes is what I'm being told, but I want to make sure that everyone, I think we have so much more to say, but if you have a thought that you would hate to leave this audience without, what would it be?
I'm just kind of still addressing what Nick said. I'm not following directions. I think it's important for us to name these systems, right? So whether we're talking about, specific community mental health systems, also community systems. So whether it's church systems, neighborhood systems, because there are lots of barriers, that way too. It takes work. It's going to take a lot of work in order to really be able to identify the different types of systems that we're looking at, right? So when we use terms like, it's baked into the system, it's not just people, it's looking at the policies, practices, and the procedures. But the folks who are at the top have to have that awareness, and if it's not affecting that person, and if they don't have a broader view, then they're going to keep things the way that they are and just continue to do what benefits that particular system in order to perpetuate itself. So I just wanted to say that. I got more, but I lost it. So go ahead.
So I'll say my last thing I want you to take is approach this conversation going forward with curiosity and not defense.
Yes.
So be curious about the things that you're seeing. Be curious about why somebody is saying what they're saying in a meeting, or why they're not saying what needs to be said in a meeting. Because we can, one by one, start to make huge change on our levels.
I will say one of the things that we talked about that Russ shared with me before our conversation was the way that even we set up our office spaces for people who have been raised to be male. And I would love for you to talk about that really quickly. Like that the fact that even the way that we provide these services can make it hard for people who are raised to be male and socialized to be male to come into the spaces.
Well, that's a whole bill thing, but
In like
real
2 minutes.
quickly, I think, one of you raised the point earlier about the social profession was created by white wealthy women. And I think that again is baked into how we provide the services. The professions are thinking about how do women respond to care? How do women access services? And so the story I shared was, most often you go into your therapeutic spaces and the chairs are set up across from each other, so look me eye to eye and share your stories. If you think about how male type people tend to share, it tends to be side by side. They're driving, they're playing basketball, they're at the bar. This can be really threatening for a lot of male type people. And so just pivot your chairs. So you're not face to face, you're side to side or at an angle. So you can have that opportunity for eye contact when he or they want it, but they're not required to give it to you. And that subtle pivot can provide an opportunity. I experienced that particularly with adolescent males when I was doing clinical work. That subtle pivot of getting me out of their face, so their face could be at the wall, at the window, at something else, but it wasn't me, allowed an opportunity for the doors to open in ways that just weren't happening when, tell me what you got to tell me, because I'm all here. I'm listening, man. I'm listening. I'm right.
And I think that encapsulates part of what we're doing today is, had he not shared that, I've been doing this for 20 years. Had he not shared that with me, no one ever has. There's an assumption that we all know what each other knows. And I had never considered that my space was not welcoming for people who had been socialized to be male or raised to be male. And it's the same thing for other people of other races, people of other cultures, that our spaces may not be welcoming, and we need to listen to that and be open to that. As we learn better, we do better, as Maya Angelou told us. I am so thankful for these conversations. Every time I walk away feeling like I know so much more and I have so many more questions. And I'm so thankful for this panel, so thank you, each of you. This will be streamed and also probably turned into a podcast as we have before. So feel free, those who weren't able to share in this space, share that with them, get them the link. And that's true for our other panels as well. The brilliance that is shared in each of those, our leaders need to hear it and know it, tag them, make sure that they see it, and make it impossible for them to ignore you. Not just because our project is amazing, but because they need to be held accountable to what they say they don't know and the changes they're not making. Thank you all so much.
Start it up.